A knock comes on your dressing room door. You turn, and a short and nervous stagehand tells you 5 minutes till showtime. You nod your head and turn back to the mirror. A long, deep breath to steady the nerves. You've worked long and hard for this, a starring role in one of the world's most famous operas. You go out and give the performance of a lifetime. It's all you could ever dream. And as you say your final words and descend through the trapdoor for the final scene, your chest begins to hurt. You grab the wooden railing on the trapdoor and clutch your chest. Your co-star rushes to your side, and the production crew rushes you to a nearby green room. A doctor is called, and as he bends over your body and the world grows dark, you hear the audience call for an encore. You want so badly to give them one. As you breathe in to lift yourself up, everything stops, including your heart. Having a love of music and stories growing up, it shouldn't surprise you that I love the theater and opera. So, of course, over the course of my life, I've heard the tale of the Melbourne Princess Theatre ghost, Fredric Federici. Tragically losing his life at the height of his career, the story is one of massive intrigue. But what I found when I went to look into it for this video left me with a completely different outlook. Originally, I wanted to go over Fredric Federici's life, who he was as a person, and tell you guys the full story up to and after his death. But what I found instead was a window into the morbid greed of humanity. People have concocted a story that uses this poor man's death as nothing more than a catalyst for a ghost story to scare the masses. So without further ado, let's take a look at the life and times of the Melbourne Princess Theatre ghost, Fredric Federici. Born on the 22nd of April in 1850, Fredric had the name Anatole Frederic Demidov Baker. He grew up in Florence, Grand Duchy of Tuscany, which in the modern day is simply referred to as Florence, Tuscany. It's probably one of the most famous cities in Italy. His father was a military man by the name of Eric Thomas Baker, and his mother the daughter of a clergyman whose name was Georgina Barbara Nee Crossman. I'm sure I fucked that up. Frederic would spend his early years training to be a diplomat in Britain, but eventually abandoned that course of his life to be a singer. He'd work for several years as a talent agent and songwriter, performing in several concerts before getting his big break to do opera work in 1873. He would perform as the king in Matriana, Rodolfo in La Sonnambula, and most importantly, Valentine in the story of Faust. Faust is a story that I want to cover someday on the channel, but the basics of the core of the story is the foolishness of humankind and not really appreciating what you have. Faust, a doctor and scholar, decides that he's done nothing with his life and makes a deal with the devil, Mephistopheles, for another chance at living. As per how these stories go, Faust thinks all is well and he falls in love with a young woman. However, the deal with the devil strikes, and not only does Faust's young love get pregnant, but he is forced to abandon her and she kills her child in shame. Mephistopheles then gives Faust one last look at her in prison before she is whisked away to heaven and Faust is dragged to hell. Again, the story of the play is for another video where I can go deeper in depth. I'm not going to give you a full breakdown of the themes and all of that here, but the starring roles for this are, of course, Dr. Faust himself and Mephistopheles. Valentine, as mentioned before, is a side character, the soldier brother of Faust's love interest. Anyone with any kind of knowledge of the stage will know that the starring role, especially in those days, was how performers made money. Unlike today's actors who perform in these huge productions and are then set up for the next several years if they don't plunge themselves into debt with meaningless purchases, performers back then were basically underpaid. They were like minimum wage workers. And they did it for the love of the art, basically. Starring roles would get some measurable kickbacks, and you could certainly support yourself and even a family, as Fredric did. Because of the fact that things that weren't starring roles didn't pay a lot, in 1878, Fredric would declare bankruptcy and continue to sing in various theaters and shows, including, but not limited to, Trial by Jury and The Sultan of Mocha. Fredric would supplement his income by teaching young singers and actors before joining the army to avoid his creditors. After feeling like he successfully was able to work his way out of debt in 1879, Fredric would leave the army and join the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company and perform as Captain Coqueron in the HMS Pinafore. While touring said production, Fredric would marry one of the other actors, a Miss Lena Monmouth, whose birth name was Jane Eleanor Finley, and they would have 2 children, Lewis Wallace Horace and Marguerite Alicia Anita Baker. In 1881, Fredric would land roles as Samuel in The Pirates of Penzance and the Pirate King in the production simply called Pirates. Man, the 19th century really loved their pirate stories. I mean, there are a ton of these fucking things. Jesus Christ. The audience and papers absolutely adored Fredric, with a popular paper at the time, The Era, writing, "Mr. F. Federici is capital as the Pirate King." And yes, that is literally all the article said about him. Not kidding you. Just as a side tangent, when I read this part in my research, I was like, oh, I gotta go find this paper so I can find the whole article. Because like 5 different sources just quoted this one line. Turns out this was the only line in that article once I finally tracked it down. Others saying, Mr. Federici has a powerful voice which comes out well in a pirate song, and he evoked enthusiastic applause. With this overtumbling of rave reviews, Fredric would get the opportunity to perform as the title role in the production The Mikado. Obvious racism of the late 1800s aside, this would eventually lead to Fredric landing the starring role as Mephistopheles in a production of Faust in Australia at the Melbourne Princess Theatre. From here, anyone who's heard the story knows the rest. At the end of the show, Mephistopheles wraps his cloak around Faust and drags him down to hell. The effect is done through a basic trapdoor mechanic, and on the way down, Federici would grip his chest and the sides of the trapdoor. The actor who played Faust, whose name I had a hard time finding, but I'm sure is out there somewhere, called for quick aid. Fredric was rushed to the green room where he would die a short time later. You might have noticed that in my retelling of the life of Federici, there are several pieces of information missing. What did he do in childhood? What were his siblings' names? What was he like as a person? Was he a kind soul who wanted the best for everyone, or was he a dick who no one wanted to be around? What did his co-stars think? What did his children think? And the answer to all these questions is basically a resounding I don't know. I searched high and low for several days to find the answers to these questions, scouring the internet for even a crumb of his early years, and even what people in his life thought of him, and I could find almost nothing. Oftentimes, when discussing historical figures, we have a metric crap ton of information on them, mostly because back in those days, keeping journals and diaries was a normal thing. Everybody just kind of did it. When someone was famous for their time, like Federici, you'd also often get opinion pieces in newspapers or even people writing about things they've heard, and while these most certainly existed for Federici, his entire legacy seems to be boiled down to he's a ghost now. The story goes like this, that while Federici was dying in the green room in the back of the Princess Theatre, his fellow cast members were doing an encore, and upon being performed of his death, they all did the Home Alone surprise face and said that he was just on stage with them and that it couldn't be possible that he was dying. When the announcement would be made in the papers the following Monday, many of the people who attended the show would also say that he was on stage for the encore, and that would begin to circulate the world and develop this Phantom of the Opera ghost story. Now, I want to first and foremost say that I find ghost stories fun. Whether they are fictional, created by an author, or they're based on someone in real life, I think they're fun, I think they're interesting. My dad and I used to go to haunted houses together to see if we could see any ghosts. We never saw any, because, and I'm sorry if this hurts your feelings, ghosts aren't real. They're not real. We have never had any tangible, actual evidence of ghosts. We have a bunch of people in history and throughout whose mind was playing tricks on them. And you might be thinking, oh, well, all these people can't be wrong. Yes, they can. Yes, they can. Because I don't know if you know this, but the brain is really fucking weird. It is simultaneously one of the most deep and complex and powerful muscles we have, or it's an organ, not a muscle, one of the most powerful organs we have, and it's also really fucking stupid. You gotta understand that humans evolved less than like 300,000 years ago, if not sooner. Okay? We legitimately are a brand new species in the grand scheme of the billions of years that the Earth has been around. So our brains still have a lot of lingering habits that it had back when we needed them for survival. Like, for example, pattern recognition. Our brains are pattern seeking by default because that's what we needed back when we were not as strong, or we were too weak to fight anything. We needed to be able to recognize when something was there. So you can see faces in everything. This is actually a psychological phenomenon called pareidolia. So when you go back and you look at an old photo and you see a face in the back of the photo and you're like, oh, yeah, dude, you're going to see faces there. You're going to see things that look like people in dark shadows and corners and old CCTV footage that doesn't have great quality because your brain is trained to do that. I was talking to a friend of mine one time and we were talking about the fact that ghosts aren't real. And I told her the story of one of my ex-girlfriends getting really mad at me because she said that she woke up with a ghost pushing down on her chest. And I said, ghosts aren't real. Like, they're not. You didn't have a ghost. You just were probably in some sort of sleep paralysis. And she said, no, I saw it. And I said, yeah, you probably saw it, but you were in sleep paralysis. Of course you saw it. And my friend asked me, she said, well, then why does everybody picture something pushing down on their chest? And I said, because that's the natural inclination of the human mind. If you wake up and you feel a weight on your chest from a blanket, or maybe your chest is hurting or something, and you're in the middle of a REM cycle and you're in the sleep paralysis phase, your brain fabricates things. I vividly remember as a child seeing the tooth fairy and feeling the pillow being lifted up for money to be slipped under. In reality, it was just my granny coming into my room to put money under my pillow while I was asleep. But because I was in sleep paralysis, I saw a big, tall, magic fairy float to the door frame, and as soon as it reached the threshold, it disappeared. Does that mean the fucking tooth fairy's real? No, because that's not how reality works. Sorry, very big side tangent. It's related to this. I promise, it's related to this. So the thing is that between the fact that ghosts aren't real and most sightings are just your mind playing tricks on you, there's two explanations for the cast and crew members and all of the attendees seeing Federici on stage. First off, this isn't what anybody said. Nobody ever said, but we just saw them. Nobody that attended said that we saw them that they saw him at the encore. That's a real possibility. This could just be a part of the fabrication of the story to create the ghost story to basically increase tourism. Number two, the other equally likely possibility is that the cast and crew expected Federici to be on stage with them for the encore, so why would they not think that they saw him up there? Because, I mean, he's supposed to be there, right? And as far as the attendees, again, he was supposed to be up there, so why would they not see him up there? The thing is that when it comes to our memories are very unreliable. Eyewitness accounts are notoriously one of the most unreliable pieces of evidence in court, and yet they are continuously looked at as solid pieces of evidence. Our brains are dumb, guys. If we think, okay, I should have saw one of the stars on stage for the encore, we're going to remember seeing the star on stage for the encore. That's how this works. So instead of Fredric Federici being memorialized with maybe a biography and stories of his life and everything, and he just so happened to be a part of this tragedy, he's instead just passed off as a basic ghost story. One of my favorite YouTubers of all time, Mini Minuteman Milo, or as I like to call him, Sexy Minuteman Milo, once said something I'm going to paraphrase. He was a human, just like you and just like me. He loved, he laughed, he hated, he cried, he had hopes and dreams, and he wanted more out of life. And to spend days researching this story and this man, and basically finding nothing but scraps about who he was as a person in favor of he a ghost now, was one of the most infuriating things I've ever experienced as a historian. I love history because of the people in it. To imagine what they were like and what life was like for them is one of the most fascinating things to me. I'm serious. Sit down every once in a while and think about your favorite historical figures and what the times were like around that time. It's incredibly fascinating and amazing thought experiments. Someday, I'm going to do a video on King Henry VIII and all his wives, and in that video will of course be a section on the most famous of his wives, Anne Boleyn. And that section will be robust with stories of her childhood, who she was before and during King Henry, and of course the last stories of her execution. Right now, there's a rumor that you can spy her ghost walking around the Tower of London. But the difference between Anne Boleyn and Frederic Federici is that Anne Boleyn is a human first, with a tragic story, who became a ghost second. And Frederic Federici is a ghost story that happens to have a real human attached to him. I said earlier in the video that the story of Frederic Federici was a window into humans' morbid greed. And what I meant by that was that Fredric's story is nothing more to people than a poetic tragedy to attract tourists to the Melbourne Princess Theatre. There's something almost Shakespearean about your final words in life being the final words of a grand performance. And as you are dragged down to hell metaphorically, your soul is dragged from your body as the life leaves you. I can see how Fredric became a ghost story. It's a good fucking story, but it ignores who he was. Imagine how his wife must have felt. She was there, working the same production. She more than likely held his hand as he died. What about his kids, who were excited to see their father after a performance, and one as big as a starring role in Faust, only to have the adults in their lives tell them that they can still see daddy if they go down to the theater. He's a ghost now. It's horrific and more than likely traumatizing. His wife was probably angry at the prospect of people using her husband's corpse as a scary story to attract tourists. It makes me mad and a little sad to think about how his friends felt, how anyone who loved him felt to watch in real time as people claimed his soul still haunts his final performance place. I hope one day I can find more information on Fredric, a book or an article or something to tell me more about his life, and I can update you all with another video. In the meantime, thank you guys for watching, and make sure that you respect the dead as long as they weren't awful people. And as always, a great big special thank you to my channel members listed on screen now. If you want to find out how to become a channel member today and get awesome perks like seeing videos early, merch discount codes, and more, then please click that join button down below. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Fredric would also supplement his income with teaching young singers and actors before joining the army to avoid his creditor. Fredric would also supplement his income with teaching young actors and singers. Fredric would before joining the army to avoid his creditor. To avoid his credit. Why can I not say the word creditors? Oh my god. While touring said production, Fredric would marry one of the other actors, a Miss Lean Monmouth. Bleh. While touring said production, Fredric would... Can I talk? Oh my god! Others saying, Mr. Federici has a somewhat powerful voice when comes out well... But instead, Fredric... But the main difference between Anne Frank and Fredric...